Good evening, everyone. Today is Tuesday, May 14th, and the time is 7:02 p.m. Melissa, will you please take roll call?
Yes. Richard Poore.
Here.
David Smith.
Here.
Andy Cabarrus.
Here.
Carl Hebner.
Here.
Melissa Denton.
Here.
Pinkerton Student School Board Member Shannon Caffell. Here. Thank you. And also seated at the board table is Superintendent of Schools Bob Thompson and CFO Jeff Dowd.
Great, thank you. All right, let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Board members, in your packets you will have 3 sets of minutes. One from the April 9th regular meeting, and one from non-public meeting number 1 and non-public meeting number 2. So if you'll go ahead and give those a look. Right. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the meeting minutes? No? Rich, you good? Missy, are you good? Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to accept all 3.
I will second that. All those in favor? Dave?
Thank
you,
you.
Dave. All right, moving on to public comments. So at this point, I'll open the floor for any public comments. Okay, none there, thank you. Moving on to school highlights. So I will call Principal Cheney up to the podium.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. Just a quick enrollment update. Since I was here last, our enrollment has continued to grow this year. We're now at 480 students across the central school. And so, just as we've talked about before, those numbers continue to rise, most notably in our preschool at this time of the year. So some things that have been happening at the central school is that we have had some wonderful concerts this spring. Back in April, the third grade team, the third grade chorus, and the Unified Arts team presented an evening of Stevie Wonder songs. The place was rocking at the school, and the students really brought these songs to life. They were moving with the songs and really appreciating it. But beyond just the music, the evening was also capped off with self-portraits of the students, and through the technology class, the students did some mosaics with Google Draw. The following week, the fourth grade students presented their multicultural program. This year's show highlighted India, Scotland, Ghana, Brazil, and Canada. The students sang in multiple languages, learned dances, and were playing drums. Technology was involved with the students creating slideshows about their country, and murals representing each country were displayed throughout the cafeteria and gym. One exciting event that we celebrated at the Central School was the solar eclipse on April 8th. What was exciting about that was it was a real great opportunity for Central School and the middle school to collaborate to help expand our students' knowledge of this phenomenon. The middle school students prepared some kits for our kiddos, as well as coming down to teach them in a assembly. One of the great parts was that the middle school students even made up a song to Party in the USA all about the eclipse to help the students understand what was going to happen at this event. Recently, we had the UNH Soil Tent visit the Central School for the 3rd year in a row. Mrs. Wise Carver continues to develop these lessons each year, and the Soil Tent gives our students an opportunity to learn what lives in the earth below us, what the ground is made of, and even allows them that opportunity to play in the dirt that kids don't always have these days. One 2nd grade student was so excited about this, he thanked Mrs. Wise Carver for bringing a field trip to the school as opposed to having to take them out into the community. Another treasured tradition that was back just before April break was the 1st grade mall. So 1st grade students each year bring in things from their homes that they no longer need. It might be old books, stuffed animals, could even be, old costume jewelry and things like that. And the other students all bring in their dimes and pennies. Staff get in on that too. And they go shopping through the 1st grade mall. This is an opportunity for students to learn how to count money, to understand counting by tens and ones. And each year they raise money for a different cause. This year, they raised $148.92 to donate to the Depot Road Scoreboard Project. I did just mention enrollment updates, but I also want to talk about next year's projected enrollment. Currently, we have 83, and that was as of this date. Today, we actually have 84 students who've begun the registration process for kindergarten. Most families are continuing to request the full-day option. I'm watching those grade 1 numbers closely as well. Our current kindergarten is about 73 students moving up to 1st grade. So at this time, the enrollment numbers suggest that we should have 6 sections of kindergarten, 4 full day and 1 half day for an AM and PM, 4 sections of grade 1, 5 of grade 2, 5 of grade 3, and 4 of grade 4 for next year. And this is a net number of teachers that we have this year, not an addition of any positions and not a reduction of any positions. Additionally, we have 35 preschool students, ages 3 and 4, who've expressed interest in our programs and will continue to maintain 2 classrooms, each one with an AM and PM. Our end of the year assessments began today with the New Hampshire SAS, starting with our 4th grade students. This spring, kids are taking the reading and math assessments. They took the writing portion back in March. And students will also be starting their iReady and DIBELS assessments between now and the end of the month. And this helps us to see how the students have grown this year. This is an important component of our MTSSA process. And by seeing our end of the year results, we can start to plan ahead and be ready to hit the ground running when kids return in the fall, to give students who might need an extra boost, and for kiddos that have done really well to continue to move them forward and potentially provide enrichment. Those end of the year assessment results will be sent to families at the end of June for iReady and DIBELS. The New Hampshire SAS ones will be sent out as soon as we have those ready from the state. The state is hand scoring the writing component this year, so there may be a delay with that. This was our 2nd year with the One School, One Book program. This year, the Central School community collectively read the book Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate. And then in early April, Mrs. Cameron and Ms. Dyer worked together, they're our librarians, with a local organization called Tailwinds to bring some raptors to the school to teach children about some of these animals that live in the trees around us. The owls were a big hit, and the turkey vulture, if you haven't seen our page yet, showed off its wingspan and compared that to that of Miss Cameron's, which was a lot of fun for both of them. So a big thank you to that evening. We had Miss Cameron, Mrs. Dyer, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Wise Carver, Mrs. Prue, and Mrs. Ponte, who worked together to create a homegrown parent evening where the celebration was trees. Kids learned about trees from an arborist, Mr. George. They enjoyed poetry. There was tree yoga to be celebrated, and kids were able to make wishes just like in the story. This event took place on May 1st, which is a significant date in the book as well. If you haven't seen it yet, we still have the wish tree up with all of the students' wishes out back. 2 more quick things for you. We just had a successful STEAM night this last week at the middle school. The Ventures teachers at both HCS and HMS collaborated to celebrate Hampstead's past, present, and future. There were many interactive opportunities. Our third grade Cadence Arcade that came to the board meeting earlier this year were there. Grade 1 technology projects were featured. And there was a collaboration between art and technology where the streets of Hampstead and some of the notable buildings throughout town were represented, and kids could code their robots to go between the middle school and the central school, or the meeting house and the central school, or all these different events. One more thing that's not on your board report tonight that I do definitely want to mention is our grade 4 mile run that occurred last Friday. Our fourth graders all ran the mile as a culminating event after their year of physical education. So a big thank you to Mrs. Ingraham and Mrs. Arroyo, who with the support of the Unified Arts team facilitated a successful run where all of the participants finished. And congratulations to Finn and Alexandria, who were our winners in each category. Yeah. Are there any questions this evening?
Question on first graders,
Yeah.
or upcoming first graders.
Yep.
Do you know what that enrollment is just right now, approximately?
Yeah, so our current rising first grade number is 73 students.
We know that there's usually students that come back in. Do we have any indication of that yet?
I don't. Last year we lost about 10 students to outside schools, and I've heard thus far from 2 returning.
Okay.
Yep, great question. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Now for our Pinkerton student liaison, Shannon Caffell. That sounds good.
There we go. For Earth Day, myself and 29 other students headed to the streets of Derry for a community cleanup with our contemporary issues class. We connected this to the topic of citizenship and being a great citizen in our communities. Junior prom is this weekend, Saturday, May 18th. Monday, AP art students showcased their artwork, while the jazz ensemble and senior dance ensemble had their final performances. Our DECA team brought 26 students to the national competition in Anaheim, California. Pinkerton brought home 2 awards out of 23,000 student teams. Our sports teams are looking in great shape as we head into playoff season shortly. Senior banquet is May 30th, senior awards night is June 6th, and graduation is just a short 24 days away on June 7th. LCA is hosting their 2nd annual cornhole tournament Friday, May 31st. All proceeds go towards mental health initiatives in our community. The Just Like Us Club is hosting a car wash May 20th in front of the gym. And the Pinkerton Players held Playing for Change on May 1st. This was a night of student-written and directed short plays. They raised $1,540 for the New Hampshire National Alliance on Mental Health. And that's all I have.
Great. Any questions for Shannon? Great. Thanks so much, Shannon. All right, moving on to current business. So Mrs. Wisecarver is going to come up and talk about her awesome Destination Imagination team.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Wisecarver. I'm the Ventures teacher at Central School, and I'm also the 6th grade DI team manager. I have been the team manager for this team for 2 years and managed another team that's now in high school. But these students here that you see before me, they have the opportunity to go to global. They qualified for global competition this year. So they received 2nd place at our regional competition, then 2nd place again at state competition, and then qualified for globals, which we will be attending next week, May 22nd through 26th. And they would like to tell you a little bit about their process and the fundraising that they have done. So next to me here are Evan Duquette, Anna Andres, Danny Leviazar, Jason Walker, and Caden Wisecarver.
Good evening. Good afternoon, school board. We are the team of To Be Continued. Okay, We are from DI, Destination Imagination, and we would like to show you a little bit about our fundraising and our journey, how we got here. And I'd like to pass it on to Anna.
DI stands for Destination Imagination. DI is a great after-school program. We participate in DI because, one, it is fun, it encourages STEAM skills, it builds our teamwork, we get to be creative, we learn problem-solving skills, and did we mention it was fun?
Our challenge. Our challenge was Uncharted, the service learning project. To complete this challenge, we needed to identify, design, carry out, and evaluate a project that addresses a need in a real community. Create and present a fantasy story about a character who goes on a quest. Design and create a fantasy map that uses technical methods to represent location information from the story. Create and present 2 team choice elements that show off the team's interests, skills, areas of strength, and talents. Now I'm going to pass it on to Jason Walker.
Our service learning project is a food drive. We donated 820 food items to St. Anne's Food Pantry. It happened on December 9th, 2023. We chose to have our food drive in December because it was near Christmas. We wanted people to have a good holiday. We met with Miss Barbrick to learn about food insecurities in our community. I'm going to pass it on to Danny.
Our story. Our story is about Jeff Sunday and Jimothy, who's Jeff's roommate. They go on an epic quest to get some food, and they must overcome obstacles and defeat magical enemies. But at what price? An arm? So the cast of our story is me. I am Jeff Sunday, the main character of our story. Caden, Jimothy, Jeff Sunday's roommate. Evan, the narrator. Jason is the map mover in our story. He controls the map. He's also a person in the French Bagel, a tree in the forest, and backstage. And Anna is a civilian, a person in the French Bagel, the mega tree, the guardian of the forest, Dr. Cheney, who is the principal of the school. A tree in the forest, and backstage. I'm going to pass this to Evan.
So we would like to talk about our team choice elements. So on our first picture, we have me and Anna working on our French bagel. How we came up with the name French bagel, it was originally going to be the English muffin, but then Caden right there decided to make bagels instead of muffins. So we decided, why not? So we decided French bagels was a good one. Then for one of our first performances in front of our team manager, we have Jeff Sunday and Jimothy trying to cross, but a magical tree is blocking them from crossing. And this is one of our very first time. And then in our last picture, we have Jeff Sunday and Jimothy finding what they've been looking for the whole time, a magical seed. Okay, now I'd like to pass it on to Anna again.
Our second team choice element were our props. In the left side, you can see an arm used by Jimothy, or the hand. In the right top corner, we have our stampede of children. In the bottom corner, right under, we have our book that explains all about the map of that they will be traveling on and the dangers of the forest. And in the middle picture, we have a tree branch used to represent that we were in the woods, and 2 seats, one made out of origami and the other 3D printed. Now to Jason.
We also had to make maps in this challenge with technical design, And as you can see on the left picture, there's a picture of Anna and Caden adding buildings to the map. And then on the next picture, they unfold it with everything on it. And then on the next one, on those other two there, we decide to make it more technical and add physics to it with marbles. And I think we were gonna do lights, but we didn't. I'll pass it on to Caden.
Our fundraising efforts. We wrote lots of business letters to several organizations in town and have talked to numerous people about DI and our global competition. We had 2 bake sales, and at one the HES school or HES One School One Book family event, and one at a Holiday Lane during baseball games. I'm gonna pass it on to Danny.
Thank you to all of our sponsors. We are sponsored by the Greater Hampstead Civic Club, the Hampstead Association of Softball and Baseball, the Hampstead Hearts Club, the Hampstead Lions Club, the Hampstead PTSA, the Hampstead Education Foundation, the Hampstead Mothers Club, Allegro Microsystems, and our anonymous sponsors and our bake sale buyers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, there's several sort of housekeeping items that the board will need to consider in order to make this wonderful experience for our DI team to happen. And so we'll dive into that. Before we do, I just want to say they have done, under the direction of Mrs. Wisecarver, a tremendous amount of work to be here tonight. The trip itself, with competition fees and travel fees, and it's about $15,000. And that trip, with your approval this evening, will be fully funded. And that wasn't just magic. That was a lot of letter writing, presenting to groups, really doing their homework. So in addition to the great experience that Destination Imagination is on its own, the work that goes into planning participation in a national competition it's very commendable. So in order, the board is in a very unique and wonderful position tonight to make this trip happen. And so for that to happen, we'd have to look at 2 policies that are both in your packet. The first policy is policy JJC, and that is student performances. I won't read the whole policy, but essentially when our students are presented with the opportunity to present or to participate in a national student competition, the policy says that all staff hired by the district will have travel, room, and board costs reimbursed to them by the district, and that 50% of team costs will be paid by the district up to $3,000. Now that is not guaranteed. The team has a checklist of things that they have to do, and I'm proud to say that this team has done all of those things, which includes structured work projects performed by the team, car washes, bake sales, or other fundraisers, which they clearly have done. Seek sponsorship from other community organizations, which clearly they have done. And not publicly solicit donations, tin cans, things like that, which they have not done. The procedure says a detailed expense sheet of projected costs should be submitted to the superintendent at least 10 days before the anticipated board presentation. Check, that has been done. Adult leaders of the sponsoring organization will review the costs with the superintendent, who will make a recommendation to the board. All of those items have occurred, and so I'd like to recommend to the board that we pay the travel expenses for the DI coach, Mrs. Wisecarver, and that we pay and that the board authorize the district to pay $3,000, which would go towards the registration fee for the event. The other costs associated, once this is given your consideration, we'll discuss under our public gift or donation policy, KCD.
Right. Any questions or comments for Bob or Mrs. Wisecarver?
I think for me, I mean, this policy was back in 2005, which I would imagine $3,000 went a long way compared to now. So while outside of this subject, I would suggest we revise this policy, bring it to the policy committee.
Absolutely.
$3,000. I'm surprised that's going to cover very much at all. So, other than that, no questions.
I did this when I went to school here, I don't know, a long time ago. And I just want to say for Ms. Wisecarver, thank you. My mother was a coach. And generally you have kids with a lot of energy and a lot of creativity and can have a capacity to do occasionally some damage. So I appreciate your patience and your energy to keep up with them, which is not an easy thing. And it's awesome that you give them the opportunity. And obviously they put a lot of work into it. So thank you so much.
I'll one up Dr. Hubner here. And this message for the kids. I was able to go to Global twice. It was a great privilege. It was amazing. Trade the buttons, stay up late, eat candy, don't listen to your parents.
It's a school-sponsored event, so let's not get carried away here. Okay.
Yeah. But just make the most of it. Take advantage of everything that they offer there. There's so many things they're going to offer you to take part in, to meet kids from across the way. I had at the time pen pals, they called me email pals or Snapchat, but from Georgia and Texas and everywhere else. It was amazing. So just have a blast, do everything you can while you're there, make the most of it.
There'll be 20 countries there represented, and nearly every incredible.
Mrs. Wisecarver, can you repeat that?
I just wanted to say that there will be 20 countries represented there and nearly every state represented as well. So it really is a chance of a lifetime opportunity for these students. I'm so proud of them.
Well, on that note, I will make a motion to authorize the up to $3,000.
Second.
All those in favor? Great.
So the second piece of that, in accordance with our public gift donation policy, which is KCD, and as the board is aware, we recently revised that policy that would allow for the superintendent to accept donations up to $2,500. So we're very fortunate. I'm going to just read a list of donations that I have accepted. We have the Mothers Club, the Hampstead Mothers Club, for $1,500. We have HASB for $100, the Lions Club for $1,000, the PTSA for $1,000, Hampstead Hearts for $200, HEF for $400, an anonymous donation for $40, another anonymous donation for $1,000. Funds raised through a bake sale still count as donations. That's for $357. And then another bake sale for $155.30. So their bookkeeping on this is tight. And then another bake sale of donations for $61. So I've accepted that, but I know the board has asked for me to publicly acknowledge those. And we likely have others, and I will come back at the next meeting to make sure, just in case we forgot anybody else.
One more $100.
Another $100 anonymous donation. So that being said, any donation over the $2,500 requires board approval. I have two of those. One is from Allegro Microsystems, and that one, actually, I'm sorry, Allegro Microsystems is for $2,000. It doesn't require board approval, but we're very grateful for that donation. The Civic Club is looking to make a donation of $3,000 $250. This will require the board's approval.
Great.
Motion to approve $3,250 for the city.
Second, oh, you got it. Nice. Thank you to the Hampstead Civic Club for their generous donation, and good luck in globals.
Awesome, congratulations.
Oh, I'll make a motion.
No, I made the motion.
Oh, you made
seconded. We just need a
Oh, all those in favor. Sorry about that.
Okay, now, now we can clap.
Now we clap. Yay!
That's awesome.
All right. So now, Bob Thompson is going to give us an update on the 2024-2025 grade 5 classroom size waiver request.
Yes, so I'm actually presenting this on behalf of Mrs. Milbury, who is not able to be here tonight. So again, as the board heard from the central school, right now we're knee deep in looking at enrollment and planning for the 24-25 school year. So in review of the incoming 5th grade class, which the board is aware, we requested a waiver around this time last year when it was the incoming 4th grade class. So as of right now, with the 4 sections that we anticipate having in 5th grade, that puts our class sizes, 2 of those classes at 23 and 2 at 24. That's based on our current enrollment, doesn't account for students moving in, students moving out. Our policy, class size policy IIB, has a maximum number of students for grade 5 at 23 students. So this request is on behalf of Mrs. Milbury, who's looking for a waiver of the policy.
So I'll be honest and share my thoughts on this. Personally, I feel like 24 students in a classroom with a single teacher is very high. And I don't really like the idea of going beyond the policy where it is.
This is the class that's going up that we did a waiver for this current year, right?
That is correct. Yeah, so the 4th grade classes, the board this time last year provided the waiver, and then we saw the numbers start to tick up. And so at the very end of the school year, an additional section was added to the current 4th grade. So there's a divider of 5. So now looking at the current 5th grade configuration, we're going back to we're going to a team that currently has 4 on it.
And the 5th grade teams are broken up by subject, or?
They are, and you know, the issue of do we run 4 sections, do we run 5 sections has been just a consistent conversation year after year. Now we're getting closer, especially at the central school, of it's consistently 5, but we're still working through some sections of 4. If the board wanted a little bit of context, so 6th grade next year, so our current 5th graders, that is a very small class. I just pulled the numbers today. There's 68 students. Divided into 4 sections is 17 students. The grade 7, which is a very large class, there's 114 students divided into 5 sections, and that's 23 per class. Now the class size policy goes up after grade 5. It goes from 23 up to 25 for grade 6 and 8. And then our grade 8 numbers, we have 83, which is a relatively small. They're divided by 5 for a total of 17. Part of the reason why grade 5 is divided by 5 as opposed to 4 is because students will get a Spanish experience in 8th grade, and that counts as the 5th teacher on the team.
if that makes sense.
And I sort of know the answer to the question. Is there any way to jigger the schedule so that the grades that have lower enrollment can assist the grades that have higher enrollment? I feel like that's going to be a nightmare, but
It is possible. It's not easy. I also want to acknowledge that our middle school, our administration, our counselors have done a ton of work on the existing schedule. But to have us even look at what a proposal would look like to add a fifth teacher in terms of reconfiguration is something that we could look at.
Well, so you've been a middle school administrator, though. Do you think that would be a constructive use of time, or do you think it would be better to go through as is? I feel like it would be a lot of work for possibly not much reward.
Well, I think we do have, it really depends on when we sit down and kind of look at what the options would be. I don't think that there's an easy solution, because if there were, I don't think we'd come here tonight and ask for the waiver. But it certainly is something that we could take a look at, knowing that coming back at the end of May to ask for the waiver after some review of what the possibilities would be, we'd certainly be willing to do that. We are making adjustments. So again, there's more to it than just a number, right? And I think the board knows this. It's really about need. And so Student Services is making some adjustments for the grade 5 numbers. So there is additional special education support that will be provided to that grade. But right now, those numbers are still at 23 and 24. So I'm happy to go back and have the conversation with the administration. I did have a sort of an initial conversation. It's not easy. It's not impossible. But, you know, we'd like to get schedules in the hands of kids as early as the end of the school year. That may compromise that.
Yeah, and it also makes them feel more comfortable, especially with the step-up day. When you talk about additional special ed supports, there's push-ins where you have an additional teacher, and also some students getting pulled out for more individualized or group instruction. Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's really about the assignment of caseloads and where special education teachers go, and so, you know, making sure that they get some of that additional support, and the supports, assignment of support staff as well.
So even if it's 23, in a lot of the classes, it might not be 23 because you'll be pulling people out, or you'll have an additional teacher in to help them.
Yeah, and the goal that aligns with our middle school philosophy is we believe in inclusion, and to the greatest extent possible, having kids access the regular education classroom, so we don't really count on the population that we necessarily would pull out.
I agree with Andy in that I don't like it, but I don't think going through and doing a whole bunch of extra work to try to play with the schedule is probably worth it. If we have support and you guys have a plan with Student Services to give them the assistance they need.
I mean, personally, from my standpoint, I'm not looking to, derail the schedule or, mess up the deadline or your goal of getting that schedule out. But where we do have probably an extra school board meeting worth of time where we could explore options, personally, I feel like we should see what those options are and what they look like before we make this choice. But that's just my standpoint. I don't know how everyone else feels.
So I was not fully understanding it. So basically, without this waiver, you would need to add a fifth teacher, which would make it a little tricky in terms of scheduling, right? You'd have to have someone teach out of content area, out of grade level, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there'd have to be a shift. And now, to be clear, the middle school's used to this model of sort of migrating from 4 to 5. We've added a writing teacher as its own independent class as opposed to embedded. We added a STEAM teacher this year to grade 6 who will move to grade 7. So the idea of adjusting for 4 and 5, but where we stand now with our staffing levels, any adjustment to 5 would come at the expense of something else in the schedule. That would either mean larger class sizes on team or less of an experience with their unified arts classes. Like it comes at the expense of something else.
I mean, my personal view on this is that research supporting, better student outcomes in smaller class sizes is somewhat limited. So I would tend to go with the recommendation of the building administration.
Yeah,
within reason, of course. I mean, this isn't like adding 6 kids to a section.
Yeah. And this is one of the things I actually did research, and it's the reason that 25 is the number is because that's when you tend to see it start to really hurt a lot. It's not ideal up to 25, but it's not a significant drop off until you get to 25. And then there's also, I would assuming that there's space issues if you wanted to try to add another teacher onto 5th grade.
Yeah, we'd have to look at space.
Okay. So there's no, and obviously an additional teacher onto staff would cost a significant more amount of money as well. So
yeah, it's not something that we it's not something that we budgeted for now.
Okay.
Do you have general education paras?
We do. We have them, I believe, for both reading and for math.
Would they be in the classroom during?
That could be part of the plan. And we have a regular education reading specialist and a math specialist that
maybe support the bigger class
help
size.
Support the grade level. It's a challenge because that support is needed in so many other places that we have limited resources in our regular education interventionists and where we can put them, but so leave it to the board to provide some direction in terms of what we'd like to do.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with Rich in the idea that if you feel like you're comfortable with it, I guess it doesn't hurt to go back and float the idea, but I don't know, for me, I wouldn't spend a significant amount of time, like hours trying to rejigger and reinvent the wheel, but that's just me.
Middle school schedule's brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal to put together.
Dave, any thoughts?
I'd like to see the options. I'd like to see what it would be for a 5th classroom.
Sure.
Just to see, smaller classrooms or not. It'd be interesting to see what the impact to our budget is, what the impact to space is, all the inputs to, come up with the correct output. Or the best output.
I can certainly put that together for the next meeting. And again, like I said, if we, sort of table the conversation, it will allow, we're still on a deadline that is fairly reasonable in terms of next year. And over the next 2 weeks, we may see that we may get additional enrollments or commitments from families, or the opposite. We have more kids that might be heading to private schools. So,
great. Yeah, I do like the idea of getting it out before the summer because if I know anything about middle school, there's a lot of drama and who your teacher is going to be and that sort of thing. That it would be better off if they knew before they went.
For sure. No, and I think Rich said it. Honestly, I'd never met a middle school schedule I really loved. And I say this as a middle school educator and as a systems leader. It's challenging. When we offer a comprehensive education, which is the right thing to do for kids, you got to fit a lot into a pretty restrictive amount of time in a student's day. So it's certainly not easy.
So to recap, Dave and Andy, what you're thinking is to look at what adding a 5th teacher would be as opposed to moving stuff around?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Bringing someone from another grade level potentially down as that 5th
or
teacher.
Yeah, or adding like somebody to the staff.
Right. Whatever it takes to get a 5th classroom, what would that impact be?
Yeah.
Okay.
The budget to, other classes.
Yeah, to other electives.
What are we losing?
Exactly.
It'd be good to see that more
All right.
on paper.
I can bring
can I add something to that? Could you look at like, do you need intervention teachers and outside?
This is your mic on?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go.
Can you look at, do you need intervention teachers outside of special ed? Like, are you short-staffed, or do you have a greater need in those areas?
Yeah, and in terms of like our staffing levels, you know, we have our positions at the middle school that are filled, with the exception we're in the process of, you know, filling a music position for next year. But in terms of what has been budgeted and what we have, is it enough? We're seeing increasing need. It's not necessarily enough, but we're trying to balance the needs of our students with the needs of our taxpayers. It is a challenge.
I'm just wondering if adding additional support staff is an option versus hiring a new teacher.
And we did talk about that last year when we talked about the addition of the fourth grade of an additional fourth grade teacher. One of the conversations that we had was about perhaps adding a regular education paraeducator. So we can throw that into the fold as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, this is the last grade that was really impacted by the pandemic, right?
Yes, yeah.
They were in kindergarten, right?
So they're still behind if we look at it as compared to, you know, children before the pandemic at this grade level. So I think that's one thing that we should be also, you know, cognizant of when we say extra help, not extra help, classroom size too big, not too big. This is the last class that is still behind what we used to be. So that's why I also want to know what are the options in order to support these kids.
Yeah, if I remember right, I believe 6, 7, and 8, our incoming 6, 7, 8 are the ones for next year, are the ones that had the bigger dip versus our incoming 5th.
Incoming 5th would have been first grade.
Correct, but I remember in iReady the dip was our next year's 9th, 8th, 7th.
Yeah. But for me, it's not about who has more or less. They were impacted by it.
Yeah, no,
so
that's
they're
true.
still behind.
Yeah.
So what support do we need to give them?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great, thanks. All right, now we are looking at the last day of school for students in the 2023-2024 school year.
Great. This is a question that I have been asked probably the most in the last month of all the questions. The master calendar for the 2023-2024 school year that was approved by the board over a year ago had an end date of Monday, June 17th. That was set to be the last student day and an early release. We have since had 2 snow days, which would push our last day of school to being Wednesday, June 19th, and that would be a half day. I'm recommending to the board that they modify the calendar to make the last student day June 14th. Rather than a half day, we would make that a full day. So essentially what we're doing would be sort of losing 2 student days. The days that are lost for staff would become professional learning days, which we have communicated to the board is something that is of critical need to us. Just as a little bit of an aside, when I look around, and this is very anecdotal, we have had less snow days than really any community in southern New Hampshire, if not at least this region. We've gone to school when our neighboring communities have taken the day off. So I feel like the June 14th, it would be an appropriate last day of school. I'll answer any questions folks might have.
Any questions or concerns?
I make a motion that we accept that recommendation.
I will second that.
Coming back after the weekend for 1 or 2 days is totally useless.
And you know, where the professional development days are so critical to the district,
correct.
It's the best use of that time, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Great.
All in favor?
Thank you.
All right. Now, Mrs. Tomaselli will come up and present the data governance plan.
Good evening, Hampstead School Board. Mrs. Tomaselli and I are here to present the data governance plan. We presented findings from the cybersecurity audit in April of 2023 to SAU administrators and subsequently the leadership team. Since April, the IT department has taken a variety of steps to implement their guidance. This data governance plan now reflects changes in practice and implementation we have made since then. Following the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency's recommendations to not have public-facing documents that contain sensitive and secure information, we have migrated Incident Response Plan and Disaster Recovery Plan to separate documents for security purposes. Only internal department members have access to this new document. We have removed local administrative access on all staff devices. Staff now need to have approval for new applications and do not have the ability to install without the approval from the technology department. We have implemented multi-factor authentication for all staff members.
Thank you. Additionally, within the past year, the IT department has created data security learning opportunities for all of the staff, as well as tabletop exercises with leadership. We've also coordinated Joe and Michael have coordinated regular phishing campaigns. And the IT department has attended CTO council meetings to stay informed of best practices and updates with NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And they continue to build upon the data inventory we created last year. This document, which is revised again this year, incorporates these best practices into our data governance planning. We will continue to make improvements and updates to this plan on an annual basis.
The CTO council is the Chief Technology Officer Council. Some of the changes that you will see in this plan include updated committee members in the introduction section. Staff accounts are authorized and annually reviewed. We've removed all new, as this includes all staff members, not just the newly hired staff. We added within our infrastructure to the end of the risk management section on page 15. We added multi-factor authentication to the password security on page 18. We've added early release times to the training on page 20. We've added data security learning opportunities and tabletop exercises to the training section on page 21. We have also added or cybersecurity incident to the security incident on Appendix A, page 25. We removed security group listings from the data access roles and permissions from the financial system, special education system, Nessus, the food services system, and replaced them with strict security roles and permissions are in place to ensure that confidential information is only viewable to authorized staff. We've replaced shall with must approve and the disposals of any district technology asset. We have added that the data breach and incident response team will meet twice a year to identify gaps in the incident response process on page 54 under data breach and incident response team. We have replaced shall be with are where appropriate in the document, and we've also replaced will with has where appropriate in the document. That concludes our changes. Do you have any questions?
Board members, any questions?
So I know I've got a couple questions here. So, you know, in the past we've heard about teachers that have directed students to different websites, and we know that there's a policy in place for that, what they need to go through the approval cycle.
Yes.
What has that been like this past year? Has there been more occurrences of websites that aren't approved being reported? Are we cataloging that?
So we have, I wouldn't say there's a real pattern to it. We certainly have denied access to a number of sites that will not commit to legal requirements under COPA and SIPA to protect personal, really what comes down to is personal information being shared. And so a lot of the sites that teachers can sometimes stumble upon that are free, the cost is your information, your privacy. And we cannot allow that as an organization. And therefore, we've denied. And usually when we do deny a request, I send an email to the teacher and explain the rationale for why it was denied. There have been several occasions, however, though, when the tool is denied, but we could do a separate permission slip. So I'll use the example of TreeRing, which is the software we use to make our yearbook. There's a lot of personal information in TreeRing. They're not going to pass data privacy. So we make a permission slip, and any student that puts information or makes an account, their parent has to explicitly grant permission. So we have utilized a few of those kinds of aside types of permissions.
Yep.
But I think in general, our teachers are getting more familiar with this idea of requesting software use, and we often direct them back to programs that we're paying for that are part of our main curriculum, and to not go to the fringe and use the tier 1 products that we're paying for.
Okay, thank you. What about on page 21, archival and destruction? You know, when we talk about personal data, you know, because there's a lot of personal data for students, et cetera. What is that spelled out in the data governance plan, or a different policy of how long we'll keep student information or employee information, et cetera?
Yes, and also anytime that we're going to destroy things, we need to have a certificate of destruction when we hire a company to come and take our old equipment that is no longer suitable for use in our environment.
Okay.
We also have a records retention policy and procedure that outlines for every type of student personnel and financial document the length of time in which we are required to keep them, and then the process for how we delete or destroy them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I'll just say I appreciate the thoroughness and kind of revisiting the policies that are encompassed in the plan, and kind of reevaluating all of them just to be as Loctite as we possibly can.
Thank you. It is, I have to really commend Joe and Michael, Caesar, Teddy, Marie. Everyone on the IT department has been incredibly diligent in tightening things up over the past few years. These RSAs are still relatively new, and this is a large organization, and we have a lot of users that are learning. So I really appreciate them moving a lot of the logins this year. We've moved a lot of our student logins into Clever because it's just easy for little ones who are still learning letters. You know, they're learning their letters and numbers, and the passwords aren't their choice. We assign a password, so Clever makes it just more developmentally appropriate.
Secure.
And it's very secure. So, but this is a shift, and a robust one, and it's going to continue to evolve every year. So it's a lot of work.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa, do we have to vote to approve? Yeah.
You would vote to reaffirm it.
So I will make a motion to reaffirm the Hampstead School District Data Governance Plan for the 2024-2025 school year.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Dowd is going to give us an update on the HCS renovation.
HCS renovation. So the time is drawing near. We are scheduled to have our site work set up begin next week, at least for the preliminary schedule. I wouldn't assume that we're going to go forward with etc. or anything otherwise, but we expect some disruptions to the classes. We don't anticipate that we will be having to relocate classes wholesale. Dr. Cheney has spoken with her staff on an individual basis to make sure that we can accommodate whatever we can. If a class may need to relocate perhaps to the library if it's too noisy, or if a space may need to be made available for some of our smaller breakout rooms we have downstairs. She's been very active in trying to make sure that we can manage that internally. So I'm looking forward to the start of construction. I'm not looking forward to the implications that it will have on the educational experience in the late spring here and into the fall. But there we are. So, and if we have anyone out there who is interested in participating in the project, we do have bid information on our website or how to become registered with BPS, who is handling all of our bidding in this case.
And since the bids, the bid went out the door, have we seen any local interest yet?
Well, we have had, I believe, 4 vendors on board already as of late last week, and I wouldn't have seen anything because it goes directly to BPS. You set up in their system. So the way that it works with BPS is they will they have their specs out on a portal. You can sign up, and paperwork is on the website, or a link to paperwork is on the website, to become eligible to view the portal. And when you view the portal, whatever your trade is, bid specs are going to be out there. BPS is still accumulating bids to form the basis of our contract, which is known as a guaranteed maximum price contract, or GMP contract. So they go out to bid to see where they should be pricing the contract, because once they do that, they're locked in. They don't award contracts to bidders at this time. They will award, and so bids are open and rolling until they're awarded. The GMP has not been put together yet. On the 60s wing, the GMP came along quite a bit after construction had already been underway. So BPS knows what our maximum is and is working hard to try and get it as reasonable as they can, and that's what happened with the 60s wing project as well.
And how frequently will you get updates from BPS on where we stand in that bid process?
Should be upcoming. I've asked to actually have access myself to make sure we can have a view into who is submitting and how their process is, or what the process is going to be, just as general oversight, which we had access in the database in the 60s wing renovation portal. So and Gino understands that we would like to know and see and understand. So I have David and Carl on a building committee, a standing building committee with the 60s wing. We use it on Mondays or Tuesdays. I don't know, 9 o'clock or so, 8:30. It was around maybe 8 o'clock. It was around dismissal time. So we have our weekly. They're more operational in nature, weekly construction meetings, but they're very informative. So as we're going through those, that'll be part of that update process to us. So, and they don't have to be in person, it might be virtual, and that's fine. So
you said those meetings, like those meetings are weekly, weekly updates?
They will be.
They will be? Okay. You guys haven't attended one yet?
We haven't had one yet, correct.
Yeah, we haven't started. We really wouldn't even be mobilizing until next week. So, but next week should be the earliest.
Okay.
So I know, unfortunately, we're behind on getting the information out for local bidders. What's the plan to get that out there now? Besides, I saw the email, so thank you, Ms. Thompson. What else are we doing to get the communication out to the community about, local bids are welcome, and, really we're looking for those?
Yeah, I think you've sent out a blast on.
I did. I sent it out through School Messenger. I also put it on our Facebook page and put it out on Hampstead Happenings and the Hampstead Community page as well.
Okay.
And I think, there's a follow-up conversation that has already begun in talking with the project manager about the steps that they take to also encourage local contractors to participate in the bidding process.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Dowd on the renovation update?
So
Great.
One last thing for parents, as was experienced with the 60s wing project, the rear drop-off loop will remain open. Employee parking may be restricted, but cars will be able to kind of pass and repass exactly where they do now. We'll have an area fenced off. But there shouldn't be any interruption, but it's good to put that out there for our parents for pick-up and drop-off.
Appreciate that. All right. Mr. Dowd, moving on, the 2024-2025 budget projection and analysis.
Yes. So you have in your packet a document that has a paperclip in it. It's a memorandum first before going into our year-end projections. The reason that the memorandum is first is we haven't met in a bit, and we have some budget adjustments that we'd like to get reviewed and approved by the board. And what you have for budget to actual projections assumes that the transfers in this memo have been approved. So I can first go through this document with you to explain what's going on. This is very helpful, I think, from a board member perspective to understand where the needs are in our district and where the demands are on our budget. We have 5 requested transfers. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I will at a high level. First is Cove Classroom Design and Construction Management. So we have that expense this year totaling about $150,000, utilizing some excess tuition, for Pinkerton tuition funding for that, legal services, and some money out of unfilled positions for professional salaries. We have additional special transportation needs due to student need and placement. That is to the tune of about $40,000. We have some special education tuition Pinkerton funding, as well as tuition to private and other schools that we'll use to cover that. We have special education outside services. We've had quite a blip, and we're going to have a presentation, I believe, on special education department funding just after we review meal prices after this. So Jessica can give you a little bit more detail on that. We have just a bunch of positions that may not be filled exactly the way that we have budgeted them. We may have moved a position, and an example is what you just said. We've budgeted for perhaps a teacher that, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, might get moved to a different grade level or a different school, and that happens. We have a number of transfers in around salaries, utilizing some teachers' aid funding for lobby secretary budget, using some additional professional salaries to cover substitute and long-term substitutes, and which makes sense. If we don't necessarily have the teacher of the position, we would have to bring in a substitute. And we have additional tuition funding that we're using to, we have a budget overage resulting from retirement and transition in the central office. And the last one is for SAFE Act grant supplemental funding for as a district general expense. So we were awarded $100,000 for the central school for two projects. One is a revamp of our cameras, and the second is to have, I'll call them repeaters or amplifiers installed for cellular phone, mobile phones, because there is no service and it is a little bit of a hazard. The bids came in higher than that amount, and I would estimate that we probably have, we'll have to pay from the general fund, not as a match, but just because the project is more than what our budget, our grant budget will allow us to pay. So we'll have a little bit of funding that will be required to cover those expenses from the district side. So that's that. Are there any questions on any of these?
I have a question. Just looking at the tuitions for Pinkerton, how did we end up with like a surplus, I guess, because that's what we're using to offset some of this?
Yep, and so we have two different tuitions lines for Pinkerton. One is the general education and the other is the special education line. And if you look at line 3, or budget transfer 3, which is special education outside services due to need, this is an example where we may have an overage for tuition because we've budgeted for a student at that school who may end up getting outplaced or may not be in attendance at Pinkerton but is receiving outside services. And so you can see that there's an offset there, almost not one-to-one, but it's 130 from tuition to outside services. And we go on our best estimates as to what we're going to have. Pinkerton is difficult because if our enrollment changes at, let's say, at the middle school within range, our costs really don't shift too much. But at Pinkerton, it's a one-for-one. So if we have a student who does not attend, that's an entire tuition. If we have 5, 6, 10, and we've been running, I think, maybe 4 or 5 per grade. It has not been an awful lot that we've been over by, which is, I guess, good in a way because I'd rather not be short. We can't be short on that one.
And with Pinkerton, it is typical that we'll get a homeschool request, a couple of them over the course of a year. So we work with Pinkerton when we receive the request and the student moves to homeschool, to a homeschooling program, we stop paying tuition. Gotcha. So that that accounts for a few every year that we anticipate.
VLAX, and sometimes if students participating in the program, we're not paying 100% for them, but they may still be participating in a lesser capacity at Pinkerton.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and something that I didn't realize until I was on the board actually for a little while is that Pinkerton special education is the same
Money.
thing where we pay specifically by student. So if you, again, there's the flexibility when you're in the middle school is you have a certain amount and you don't actually have to, that doesn't increase the services if you get one more in. With Pinkerton, you pay for whatever the amount is. So Pinkerton, the amount can change significantly.
What is the tuition to Pinkerton? Not
16,
for special ed.
That's like 16,000.
Okay.
Base. So when you see that we have Pinkerton special education tuition that we're looking to transfer over, underlying that, every student who would receive service there would be paying a general tuition under general education as well.
Gotcha.
Vote on that.
Yep. All right.
So I'll make the motion to transfer from the accounts listed on the page. Common two.
Second.
All in favor? All right.
So now we can look at the year-end budget to actual projection. And again, I'll say it every time we talk about budget surplus or projections. We have two areas that we look at. One is expense and one is revenue. There are always two components to your budget. And you can see on the total estimated surplus, we have an expense surplus. I would estimate about $237,000 and a revenue surplus of $642,000. I will say that I think that it's good at this point that this is the lowest expense surplus that I think I've ever come back with here in this district, which I think speaks to the fact that we're budgeting better. We're able to spend the money to the budget better. This also does include some costs associated with the construction project, the costs we have right now anyway. So overall, really, there's nothing exciting. Salaries, I'm estimating about $100,000. We're really running down after all of the transfers that we've done, a lot of the other accounts. So realistically, there's nothing really that strikes me. If you have any questions on the expense side, I'm happy to entertain them. On the revenue side is where we're really going to see some of that surplus come through. We've exceeded expectations for special education aid by $74,000. Already received that. Medicaid, we're going to fall short by about $42,000. Interest is at about $70,000, which is where it's been. Equitable education aid, so we received an additional component of that beyond what was budgeted, and that's to the tune of about $394,000. And capital reserve, I'm listing $140,000, and we won't be doing a capital reserve withdrawal on any of the work until probably we're done, as had been approved by the voters. So whatever we've paid out this year will be set up as a receivable from the capital reserve fund. So I expect that we'll see that offsetting revenue to some degree. So this year.
So a couple questions on this is, so equitable education aid, is that from a change in state law or?
Yes, and the state goes through this process almost every year, and there are bills out there right now that have been topic of discussion. And what happens is a lot of times communities are putting their budgets together, they're really not happy about what their tax rate's going to be, and so it gets attention around this time of the year. Around this time of the year in terms of actually legislating and creating a bill to correct it. And so the bills are very complex usually and address sometimes free and reduced, sometimes different factors. Reading or literacy was a component, I think, at some point. So there are a number of factors that will go into those types of bills, and this bill was from a while back. They're discussing one now as well.
And then professional improvement, that's like professional development, like that's money that's available for like workshops or tuition reimbursement, and
Yep.
the teachers didn't max out that. Okay.
We have a very well-educated staff already.
Yes, I approve of that highly.
So Just a question on this. So we have $1.4 million estimated return. Then you got the $1 million for the capital reserve that was voted. So it's actually $400,000, which could be returned to the
Could be.
taxpayers. Correct?
That's fair, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Just want to make sure that when we say estimated return, it's really not true. It's $400,000 because $1 million we know is going to capital reserve.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. You also have your fund balance retained. I forgot that we do have some new board members. I won't get too much into it, but essentially the board voted last year that out of the surplus that they had, that they would retain $500,000, and that $500,000 is to be used under certain conditions. Basically, we'd have to be out of money, which is helpful when we're running on a tighter budget, and you may have something happen, or a roof could collapse or something. Who knows? And you may need to access that. So that's available, but that has to be renewed every year. So that will be released, and then you'll meet in presumably July or August, and maybe August, to be able to finalize that in order for me to be able to finalize my state documents. Different from the capital reserve.
Any other questions for Mr. Dowd on the year-end budget? Okay. Mr. Dowd, you are going to give us an update on the 2024-2025 school meal prices.
Yes. So I have a proposal, and you have the schedule in front of you that will show our current versus proposed prices. All we're really proposing to change, we're not looking to change breakfast prices at all. We're looking to change our lunch prices from a current of $3 at Hempstead Central School for students to $3.10. Middle school students $3.25 to $3.35, and these are for meals. And adults $4 to $4.25 for meals. The reason for this, there are a couple different reasons. One is that when we accept federal funding from the USDA, we have to make sure that our costs and what we're charging are in line so that we're not being subsidized by that federal program. So there is a schedule that the DOE puts out that helps with pricing, and this is suggested by that worksheet, that schedule that we do annually. I guess we've had the good fortune of receiving and being the recipient of a lot of funds from the state through the Supply Chain Assistance Grant line. And that has had and has been very helpful to us in the current year. But going forward, I don't think our cost structure is going to change, but we won't have that additional revenue to include in our books. So this will help us stay a little bit ahead of that as well. I really don't like price increases, but where we're at, I can't, the food service fund really can't operate a loss once we lose that supply chain assistance revenue.
Board members, any questions or concerns about increasing the cost?
Yeah, just something to note is that there are students, what is we got, 5 or 6% for free and reduced lunch?
We're closer to 9.
Oh, we're closer to 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, so about 1 in 10 students that have lower incomes at home are able to get food for cheaper. So this would would not affect those families. So.
Anyone else? Right. So I'll make a motion to accept the proposed meal increases for the 2024-2025 school year. All in favor? All right. And Jessica Parsons is now going to talk to us about special education department funding.
Good evening, everyone. How are you?
Doing well.
Good. I did want to say, if I can get this mic to stay up, that I'm going to redefine this as the student services budget update. And I say that because it truly is a student services budget. It isn't just encumbrance of special education services, but it's for all services, especially those that we are federally mandated to provide for our students, such as Section 504, McKinney-Vento, some of our Title I, our nursing, our counseling. So all of those services are kind of lumped into our budget. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that it's more than just our special education services. And essentially, anything that isn't within the general education classroom budget ends up falling into the student services budget. So today, I'm going to talk to you, or this presentation aims to provide a transparent overview of our revenue sources, our current balances, and our budget management strategies that we use. Our goal is to really just demonstrate that despite the significant surge in referrals and student needs, we do remain in control of our current financial obligations that we know of today. And I think that that's in big part to our proactive approach to budgeting and monitoring. And I'm going to get to that at the end of the presentation, so you'll kind of see how we do that. But today I'm also going to review our revenue sources, the current balances for our main student services accounts, so the ones that are the most variable, and then just our budget management strategies. So we'll talk about revenue, expenses, and our future plans. And our revenue sources fall under three main categories. Our IDEA grant, and I'll talk more specifically about that, our Medicaid to Schools reimbursement program, and our New Hampshire Special Education Aid, previously known as Catastrophic Aid or CAT Aid. So the IDEA grant. The Individuals with Disability Act that came out in the 70s and then was kind of revamped in the early 2000s, really paved the way to ensure that school districts were providing services for all students with disabilities. They told us back in 2004 that eventually they would fully fund this. They still have not fully funded IDEA. So this is a federal mandate that is only partially funded. And I say that because I think it's important to note that we are federally mandated to provide these supports and services. We're federally required to and we want to, right? We want to provide all of these programs for students, but just know that we do not get all of the federal funding to implement these programs. And really this grant, and I think this is why it's important for that highlighted word in there, is it assists states in providing special education and related services to eligible children with disabilities. These funds only supplement various initiatives, including evaluations, IEPs, specially designed instruction, technology, contracted services, and professional development for educators. So essentially what this grant is supposed to do is, it's December and a significant need occurs in the district, or even an equipment need for a student with a disability occurs. This additional money allows us out of budget to be able to fund unanticipated costs. And so if you start to recognize that some of that funding is needed year after year for a contractor or a provider, then essentially you need to absorb that into your budget because it is no longer supplemental. We'd be supplanting a service for the district. And so it really is important to know that this money isn't to pay for a certain service year after year after year. It really is to supplement any unanticipated costs that happen or reoccur. As you can see, our funding has increased from the fiscal year 23, from fiscal year 24. I think that is mostly due to our increase in special education students, but also obviously in the cost of being able to provide those services as well. We have not received our allocation in the grant management system for the upcoming fiscal year 25. When I looked again today, last year's email came around May 25th. So I can anticipate that within the next couple of weeks, we'll be getting that, that funding. Any questions about that revenue source? And they break it out. The IDEA can be used, the top one can be used for anything. There is a specific allocation for preschool in general, but you can use the top IDEA for preschool if you need more funding in that area. And then at the bottom is just the total of that funding that comes in. So as you can see, when you have a budget of close to $4 million, $300,000 is a very small amount of money to support some of the programming that we need to provide. Any questions about this?
How do you go about, I guess, reapplying or reporting the number of eligible students per year basically to dictate how much funding you're going to get each year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andy. So we have mandated reporting that we have to report to the DOE every year. We also use the Department of Ed's Nessus system, so they're able to pull real-time numbers in terms of that piece. But it is really our October numbers that we submit based on our tracking systems. And to be honest, I don't fully know or understand the formula. And really, it starts with how much the state of New Hampshire gets and then how they allocate it to each town based on whatever the formula is that they have that year.
So basically, like, say if, like, we had that one bump one year where we had a bunch more people in one grade, and then a couple of years later they went away. That's basically the IDEA grant is. You get 3 or 4 special ed students, all of a sudden in the middle of the year, they supplement you for the year, and then you figure it out afterwards.
Especially if you get move-ins, right? Or you identify a child having a significant disability and the student requires a tremendous amount of support. You haven't budgeted for that in October. This is a good, last year, it's a good opportunity to be able to provide those services and not have a huge financial hit to the district. Another revenue source is a Medicaid to Schools program. And so Medicaid reimbursement to school involves federal Medicaid funding provided to cover certain health-related services provided by, to eligible students. And I believe it was 2019, 2020 when there was an update to the regulations for Medicaid to schools. Unfortunately, this hasn't been fully implemented yet. By the DOE, we're still waiting. We were informed that Section 504 would also be included in Medicaid to schools. We have not been given any guidance on how we would be able to bill back for that. So to be continued, we certainly have a large amount of students receiving 504 services, and we would love to be able to start to bill back for those, and we are unable to do that at this time. And these services include speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and other medically necessary services. They deemed them years ago as kind of the healing arts. They do have to have a specific licensure and a number under Medicaid to be billed. The other piece that's interesting is that it's blind billing. So we don't know what students are eligible for Medicaid. So some years we might have students who have a significant amount of needs and they're Medicaid eligible. We blind bill for that. We get a large amount of reimbursement back. That student could move, they could no longer be Medicaid eligible, and so we have no idea really kind of how to determine behind the scenes who's eligible, and so this kind of is just one of those, we hope to bill for as much as we can, and I think with some of the changes in the laws and also some of the billing practices, we also had a recent audit last year where we recognized that we needed to change a few of our practices, and that also can impact the amount we're able to bill back for students. So, Joe, you can move to the next slide. You can see that it's been very variable over the last 4 years. I will say that the number in 2024 is as of today. So you will sometimes see towards the end of a quarter or even towards the end of the year, there may be situations where sessions have been posted but haven't necessarily been sent to Medicaid yet through our billing system. So I anticipate that the number for 2024 will increase. I am not confident that it's going to be to the same as it was in 2023. And I have a couple of reasons why. I think the biggest reason is we've contracted for a lot of paraprofessional services this year. And with that, I don't believe it's been fiscally responsible to contract for more hours just to have them bill back for the services. And because we are so short-staffed in general, it has been really difficult to provide additional time for our paraprofessionals to do billing because we need to get someone to cover the student in order for that to happen. And so the priority really for me right now is to make sure student services are completed first, and the administrative tasks that the paras do are really more if we can get it into their schedule. We try as much as we can, but the time that we have in terms of the early release days, we're really utilizing that for professional learning opportunities. So it has been difficult to provide opportunities for our paraprofessionals to, one, be trained on how to bill, and two, to be able to bill. Also, we're switching a lot because of coverage, and so it's really hard to have a consistency across the board in terms of billing practices. So I do believe that that has had a huge impact on our billing this year. Any questions about Medicaid?
I guess just 2 points of clarification. So one, you said that, so we may not know which students are Medicaid
Yeah,
eligible?
we're not supposed to know. It's blind
We're
billing.
not supposed to know.
Yeah.
And then
So we bill for all
you bill
that
for
have
all.
medically necessary services,
Okay.
and then on the back end, the company we use, MSB,
Yep.
does all of the billing, and then we pay a fee for them to do all of the kind of legwork for us to bill to Medicaid, and then we receive checks back on a monthly basis. Jeff, is that typically, or quarterly basis? Bi-weekly.
Okay. And then you said something towards the beginning of this section about not having a clear picture on how to bill back in certain areas, or how to receive reimbursement, I think. I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. It was in the slide before. You were basically.
Let me go back to that. So.
And I know that there were a number of changes that Jessica referenced that occurred in 2019.
Was it 19? Yep.
Basically, one of the big changes was schools used to just be able to submit for reimbursement, and then the Department of Health and Human Services added a requirement of a physician's order. So you essentially needed a doctor to sign off on certain things like occupational therapists. I think speech therapy was on there as well. And that makes it really hard for us. We don't have a physician on staff.
Right.
And parents were often reluctant to go out and get those orders. They thought that they were sort of unnecessary. So that really was the reason for this significant decline in revenue, not just here in Hampstead,
Across
everywhere.
the board. Yeah.
And we're starting to recover.
It's harder and harder to be able to access the funding in Medicaid. They're putting a lot of regulations and rules around that. The other piece is, if it's not, this might be what I was trying to explain, is if it's not written accurately in an IEP, so just kind of the language, and it might be one word off, they can come back for us and not allow for us to bill back for that, or we have to pay back the services. So
I know what it was. So it was specific to the 504.
Oh, that they had put in the regulations that we would be able to bill for contracted services or these related services under 504. So oftentimes we have students under 504 that have PT services or OT services or speech services. We were going to be able to bill back for those. They have not provided. They have not provided the guidelines to us on how to do that, or any mechanism. So, we do pay a percentage to MSB, which is really helpful. It allows us to have them kind of understand the regulations, put it together in a CRM system, so that we can just utilize that. And one, we have not been given guidelines. And then if we were to be given those, then we kind of pay MSB to help us put those guidelines into their system so that we are accurately reporting. We just haven't received those regulations yet.
And
from
as
the
far as
state.
we know, that's a statewide issue where no school district has received those guidelines, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are districts that are not billing, are not seeking reimbursement for Medicaid because of the significant amount of regulation.
And what they'll do is they'll provide, if you're able to bill and it's a medically necessary service, they're letting that happen. We'll receive the reimbursement for that when they come back to audit. If they audit things and the appropriate paperwork's not in place, like we didn't get a consent or we didn't get a sign off from the physician, then they can take that they can request that funding back. And we did have to pay a little bit back last year after, I think it was a 3-year audit, so from previous years. So that's also another risk what we take when we're doing the reimbursement program. We really need to make sure that we are following the regulations. And that's tricky sometimes when you're really focused on doing the work with kids. Any other questions on Medicaid to schools? Okay. So the federal government and the state have, in another effort to try to help fund, IDEA, have created New Hampshire Special Education Aid, or what was previously known as catastrophic aid. So it's funding allocated to support special education services and programming for students with disabilities. This funding is intended to supplement federal IDEA funds and local budgets to ensure that all eligible students receive necessary services and supports. And really this is if a student costs are 3.5 times the estimated cost per pupil. And this is really, this number is kind of set by the DOE every single year. But once a student meets that 3.5 threshold, or and say, I think it's somewhere upwards of like 65 to 70,000 right now, then, and we hit that threshold, then we can start to, they would be eligible for us to request special education aid back from there. And so this process is pretty tedious. In order for us to bill for special education aid, we need to track every single invoice down to attendance logs for students eligible for this 3.5 times. And that all has to be uploaded into the Nessus management system. And there's several drafts of this that go back and forth between us and the DOE regarding if they will take a certain invoice, if it doesn't have the correct documentation to meet the services. So if a vendor uses a different term than what is on the actual service delivery grid of an IEP, sometimes that gets kicked back to us. So then we have to go back to the vendor and say, hey, can you reword this so that it meets this? Because it was the service, it's just about wording. So there's a lot of technicality that's involved in this. I am extremely proud of the work that we do. We really have, and this number really isn't an indication of whether or not we're doing the right thing in terms of billing. This is really an indication of whether or not we've had enough students meet the cap here. And so there's been a bit of variability, but it's staying somewhere within above the 500,000 range.
With this in IDEA, is the transportation, if you have to do an outplacement?
We can bill back for transportation in here, and if there is a requirement in terms of a monitor, if it's written in the IEP correctly, then absolutely we can do that. And we've been doing audits around this, and previous to last year, it was all kind of being done closer towards the end of the year. And so we've put in some practices in place. There was a decrease in the staffing in student services. We went from having 2 full-time admin assistants to 1.5. And so with that, we've had to be really strategic about how we collect data. And so we start at the beginning of the year recognizing all of the students that we have in programs that we perceive will reach cap. And we start to pull out their grid and all of the invoices we expect to receive per month. And we're really trying to make sure that we are in advance uploading those things so that we're not waiting to the last minute. And if we need to get an invoice change or attendance records, we're not chasing providers in June, that we're chasing them the previous month after we didn't receive something. So we're really trying to build in some systems so that we don't miss opportunities to be able to bill back for this.
So something that had come up at one of the Pinkerton meetings that we had been at is the Pinkerton Sending Schools often have students in placements for programs that it would be possible, I don't know how realistic, but possible that we could have programs at Pinkerton, and then it would be cheaper because the transportation would be less. And with all your free time, Bob, if you can, for me, you don't have to go into super in depth, but having a conversation with the other superintendents for the sending towns in Pinkerton about which program would be most cost effective for sending towns might be not going all the way down the rabbit hole, but at least starting a conversation.
Yeah, and it's certainly part of an ongoing conversation we've been having with Pinkerton about expanding, especially with the new construction projects. They're adding a social studies wing that has really nice special education space built into it for like functional life skills and other special education programming.
First 2 floors.
So I think we're
really okay.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's
we're
really
ready,
good to know.
to continue having that conversation. There's also some change in some of the leadership in the special education department at Pinkerton. So engaging the new leadership in that conversation, I think, would be important as well. We
And
just had
we're-
the conversation today, actually.
Yeah, and talking with Francine, because she does a majority of our work with Pinkerton, is looking at the sending districts of what are some commonalities or trends in some of the areas of students that are struggling to continue to be successful at Pinkerton. We see a high increase of students with anxiety. It's a big campus, and recognizing, is there a way that we can build some internal programming there? And sending schools have similar challenges that we do, and so thinking about that in terms of future program planning so that we can create some cost efficiencies for sure, and to keep kids in their home district. That is also very important.
Well, and for me, like we have autism, we have operational defiance disorder, we have intensive needs, and we have life skills. All four of those, the difference between a 20-minute bus ride and an hour-and-a-half bus ride means they may be functional that day versus there's no chance they're going to be functional. So, yeah. So thank you for looking into it, and please keep doing so.
The other thing, I really spoke to this more in regards to students who are in out-of-district placements. We are able to bill if students in district meet this 3.5 times. And so we are starting to pilot that a little bit. That hasn't been something the district's done in the past. And so we are, the Jordan Stebbins, who our special education administrative assistant who supports this role, is really looking at some students within district that may potentially meet this cap, and we're tracking to see if there is potential for internal students to also, for us to seek reimbursement for those students as well. Any questions on the special education aid? We have to begin this process. Has to be completed by July 30th. A couple of back and forth drafts go back and forth, and we typically receive the payout by November of that fiscal year. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about current balances of the main student services account, and I'm going to focus on 3 because these are the ones that are most variable across the school year. And it's typically tuition, contracted services, and transportation. And these accounts tend to be most variable because student programming needs change, and they require flexibility within our budget to accommodate increases, decreases, or shifts to other types of services. And so I can give you an example of this, is that we may be paying tuition for some students to be in an out-of-district placement. That placement may no longer suit their needs, but we had budgeted in that fiscal year for them to be in a placement. They have since changed out of that placement, may be getting services within Pinkerton or within district, but may require additional contracted services to be successful in our school setting. And so the money from tuitions would essentially be shifted to contracted services. And so as you can see, the first line is kind of what originally was the voted budget. You can see where we've had to do some budget transfers, where we are year to date, what we have left to encumber, and where we're at the budget balance. This is no longer accurate because you just approved from Jeff a budget transfer, so we'll no longer be in the negative, but I couldn't give you a presentation until you had approved that. But as you can see, really you do have to think about how you're moving money in between these accounts because the students' needs change, placement may change, the need for services may change. In addition, with the influx of having increased student needs that we're requiring additional placements, obviously our transportation costs have increased. The other reason why transportation is variable is we use Durham School Services, and if we are able to cost share a ride, that's amazing and we get the benefit of that, but we're not always guaranteed that. So if a student ends up from another district no longer needing to share a ride, we then have to pay the full cost of that ride. Any questions about these main accounts? The other reason, and the one thing I wanted to talk about in contracted services is obviously it is a large increase from what we had voted on budget-wise. I think one of the main areas of that is we've had to contract for paraprofessionals and RBTs this year because we were unable to hire them. And so that there was a cost increase there where we did not actually access the salaries for them within the salary lines. So that is another reason for an increase in that, unanticipated, of course. Any questions about those accounts and the variability in those?
So this is a kind of a random question about contracted services.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have where you need a school psych, a PCBA, occupational therapist.
Uh-huh.
Are there any districts that share across districts? Like they're, you know, half-time in one district and half-time in another district? Is that?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Okay, there are. Okay.
Yep. There are districts who do that. You see it more in SAUs that have multiple school districts.
Yeah, rural districts.
And they'll share that, and their business office ends up being able to easily kind of split those bills. I have not. We have not utilized that here since I've started, but that may be something to look into as we kind of continue to increase services, but not maybe need the need for a full-time provider.
That was way more curiosity than it was a suggestion.
With that budget balance of 1901 in transportation, obviously that's not a lot of money, and I could look at that two different ways. One is that we've budgeted right down to the penny, and we're doing great. But do we anticipate that going into the negative and requiring another transfer request in the next meeting, or no? Okay.
But Andy, if you look at our voted budget was $550,000, we're doubling what we budgeted for.
Right.
So something to call out for next year.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great point.
And just to add to the conversation, to give some perspective, our transportation student services is very similar budget-wise to what we spend for our regular education transportation.
The cost to transport a single ride is pretty large. And so when we have students that require that, we need to be able to provide that transportation so they can get to the program that meets their needs.
Absolutely.
Okay, so our budget management strategies. We really try hard to diligently monitor the accounts and communicate frequently. I communicate frequently to the superintendent and Jeff. We have biweekly meetings. And in those meetings, I talk about if I see an increase in a need where I anticipate it may have a fiscal impact. So I'm constantly having conversations about that. I have weekly check-ins set up with the administrative assistants to review invoices that come in, our current account balances, and additionally, we have spreadsheets to track our grant accounts and our district accounts to ensure kind of a comprehensive oversight. I'm really asking if our account gets close to $1,000, I'm asking to be notified if it happens in an off week, so that I can look at why that anomaly may have occurred. What is it, because we're about to close that invoice and we no longer need to be paying that out, or did we get an increase in because of an increase in services? Has that impacted that, and will that impact the bottom line? Which is why Jeff and I think this is the second or third time we've come back for a budget transfer here, because we've recognized that we've needed to make those changes. And throughout these monitoring efforts, we've recognized opportunities to transfer to offset increases in one account versus the other. So we haven't had to borrow outside of student services yet. And so, for instance, if a student no longer requires placement but still needs services, we're shifting funding from the tuition account to the contracted services account to accommodate for the changes in the service provisions while maintaining our fiscal responsibility. So that's kind of how we're working through the management. It is really tricky in special education. You're drafting and developing a budget starting in October. We get it approved by the winter, and then we're saying kind of that's set. And any of the increases or any of the changes that occur over the spring, those are the things we hope that we have enough money in IDEA to cover, but often not. And so we're recognizing, Joe, you can go ahead and do one more, just to kind of, despite the challenges posed by the increased referrals and student needs, I think our budget management strategies have kind of allowed us to stay in a pretty stable financial position, while still committing to providing all the services for our kids and in the best interest of students. But I also want to make you acutely aware that these increased needs for services, placements, and staffing throughout this year are probably going to have a significant impact on our budget next year. As you can already see, we're really kind of down to the last few dollars here. And, one could assume that that's good budgeting, but it also makes me a little bit nervous not to have that additional cushioning in case there is some sort of significant event that would require us to spend some money. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. We are looking at this from a long-term perspective, is how can we continue to build capacity so that we're not continuing to increase our budget. I think our number one way to do that is to continue to increase the capacity within classrooms and in the tier 1 setting and tier 2 settings for kids to get what they need, so that hopefully we're mitigating the need for all these additional special education costs.
And that's And assuming that's one of the reasons we have $500,000 for encumbrances is to have that cushion for whatever variety of reasons, including this.
If we have something encumbered, it's because we have an expense that we have reserved that money for, not typically speculative. And my office, my staff will monitor, so I'll approve a requisition into a purchase order, and let's just say Tommy, student, requires services at a placement for $100,000. That hits the account and encumbers that. As we pay it down, it'll lead away the encumbrance. The thing is, though, that I think what had happened in previous districts is that the total budget in that line was $100,000. Tommy needed services for $100,000, but then Susie needed services as well. So a second purchase order requisition would go into the system, and both would be lowered. So one would be $50,000, and the other would be $50,000, which is great for about half the year.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of what had happened in some surrounding districts, is that the purchase orders were the vendors were getting paid, but the purchase orders were not extended out over the life of what the contract would have been for the full year to make it fit into the budget.
And Tommy and Susie are generic students, not identifiable on a purpose. just in case there's a Tommy and Susie out there in special education.
Yeah, so,
everything that we're saying, goes back to the previous presentation on the budget. I mean, we're running about a 3% back at the end of the day with all of these expenses. Yeah. I'd say over the last few years, we were running 5-6% is how much we'd have, let's say, extra at the end of the year, giving back to taxpayers, capital reserve, whatever. We are now running about that 3%, which is kind of where that, I'd say comfortable number is.
Yeah.
Less than that, it starts to get a little, sketchy.
So in student services, does enrichment, does that fall under student services as well? Or like ventures and stuff like that?
That actually does not fall under student services. Well, doesn't mean we wouldn't support students in the ventures program. So you almost caught me there on that one, Carl.
I'm just asking for budgeting purposes.
No, they do not. Their salaries and their supplies and their programming does not come out of student services.
I just want to say, somebody who's dipped their toe into more and more student services this year, that thank you for the people that work in it and all this complicated paperwork and minutia that you have to understand, which is very hard. It is much appreciated.
Especially when we just want to work with kids.
Do a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
a lot of paperwork.
Something that folks need to understand when it comes to budgeting is we talk a lot about zero-based budgeting, but largely we don't really use that model with precision in student services. It's about projecting the rate of increase and looking at, what our actuals are, looking at historical. And I'm saying this to sort of prepare the board for when we begin to budget next year, that our rate of increase is increasing, and that will be reflected in the proposed budget that we bring to you next fall, right? Like if we applied zero-based budgeting to student services, we would have a big issue with our current budget. And also the other piece too that Jess sort of referenced, which is really important, is we are really rethinking right now how we're utilizing our IDEA grant for next year. The increased amount of services require an increasing coordination. Right now we have coordination in both buildings that's being done by contractors. We need to reevaluate that to see if we can utilize some of our IDEA funds to have coordination of special education services done by our people, our employees. So that's something that we're exploring right now that will be part of a future conversation we have with the board.
My slide is resting, but it's a thank you. And do you have any additional questions?
No, this is really good. Thank you.
I'm hoping that addressed some of the questions and concerns that have come up in previous meetings.
Definitely.
I think it spells out, especially those that really don't know much about what the cost is and where it goes. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time tonight.
All right. So for the next agenda item, where it is going to be kind of a large item, I'm going to make a recommendation just based on the time that we have to potentially push that to our next meeting, if that is okay. I want to make sure that it gets the attention it deserves.
We can.
I could move it along and go quickly, but whatever you would like to do is fine with me.
I think we can certainly table it for the next meeting. Just know there's the observation and evaluation model we're proposing, and then the other much bigger piece is the professional growth model, which we'll submit to the Department of Ed. We'll end up doing both of those in the same night, which is not an issue, but just to be aware. So yeah, looking at the time, there was a lot of great questions and good conversation around our student services budget, so I can understand why that need might be.
Sorry, Nicole.
That's okay.
I know you prepared a lot.
It's okay. So our next meeting, I'll be going through this evaluation model, but also the PGM, which is a bigger kind of piece. But we are a little bit up against a deadline to get the PGM to the state. So, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We owe you.
Yeah. I warned her.
Or a coffee. All right. Moving on to our next agenda item, the superintendent evaluation update. So, since our April 9th meeting, we did go through and complete our evaluations of the superintendent. We will go into a non-public session later on tonight to review the compiled responses from all our evaluations that were completed. And then we'll schedule another non-public session on the 28th to continue with the process. Any questions or comments on the evaluation process? Obviously, we'll go into non-public a bit later. Okay. Moving on, the first reading of some policies. So we have 5 different policies in our packet. And just seeing if I have there they are. There it is. So just giving brief overviews of these. We'll start with number 1, JKAA, the use of child restraints and seclusion. There were some revisions to this. This was last revised in 2014. So there's been some substantial revisions and reformatting. So if we go ahead and take a look at JKAA.
And Bob, for this one, this is just kind of in line with what the changes in the state have made and other school districts are doing?
Yeah, this is to ensure compliance with the law, which is already our practice.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions or comments on JKAA before we move on to the next one? Okay. Policy number 2 is IHAMA, teaching about alcohol, drugs, and tobacco. It was last revised in 2018. And there's a suggested revision in response to New Hampshire law in 2019, which included a requirement that districts adopt specific policies regarding violations of youth access to and use of tobacco products. So go ahead and take a look at that policy. I think this one's important, knowing some of the struggles we've been dealing with vaping at the middle school, and I think refining our policy around that and kind of revisiting this whole conversation is just an important one to have in 2024. Any questions or comments on that policy? Okay, number 3 is FEA, educational specifications, no updates except a name change and a small revision in the first paragraph for clarity. So this one has to do with when developing new facilities, the superintendent will develop a set of comprehensive educational specifications for the architect when planning those new facilities.
And again, this, the board is aware that this is our earnest attempt to update policies, really reaffirm a number of policies. So the last time this policy was updated was in 1992. So this is really a reaffirmation. However, we did add the single line in blue when planning new facilities. So technically it is a policy revision and not just a reaffirmation.
All right. Policy EBCD, it's unchanged since the adoption in 2013. We revised it to combine it with policy EBCE regarding school closings in an effort to have fewer but more comprehensive policies where 2 samples have substantial overlap. So the recommendation here, if you look at both EBCD and EBCE, is to repeal EBCE and adopt EBCD instead.
And I just want to say, as one of the more controversial things that superintendents go through, I think you've done an excellent job so far.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions on that final policy? Everyone good? Okay. I will make a motion to move these 5 policies to second reading.
Second.
All in favor?
Can we take more time to actually read these?
All right. Moving on to board comments and correspondence. Anyone have anything to share?
I'll just say I was at the One School, One Book at Central School. It was pretty amazing, the whole setup that everybody put together that was listed earlier. It was amazing. The kids were all in it. They were listening to the stories being told. And just a big shout out to local hero, Dave George, who spent a good amount of time explaining a lot to the kids and got them really engaged. So I think beyond teachers and admin that were there, David George was another highlight for many of the kids and family members. So just thank you, and look forward to going to that every year, maybe even when my kids aren't going there. So
We'll hold you to that.
All right.
And Dave, you just reminded me, I was at both the 3rd grade Stevie Wonder performance and the 4th grade multicultural presentation, and both were insanely entertaining. They were awesome. I coach a lot of those kids, and it just made me so proud to see them up on stage and putting themselves out there and speaking in front of big crowds. Just really awesome to see.
And I'm saddened I will be missing the parade this Friday. It's the highlight of the year. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend, but I look forward to hearing about it. So.
All right. Board members, anything else? Okay. Moving on to the consent agenda.
All right, under personnel report, I do have one professional nomination for Michaela Moskovich as the HCS Early Childhood Special Educator. I do want to mention that Michaela is a staff member in the Hampstead School District. There's just been a change in the status of her credential, which now allows us to bring her name forward for professional nomination.
Does that mean you're looking for a motion?
Oh,
to-
I'm sorry. Yes, yeah,
Sorry.
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking for a motion from the board to approve her nomination.
I'll make the motion to approve Michaela Moskowitz.
Second.
All approved?
And then under superintendent report, I do have 2 additional donations just to notify the board about. The first one is from Home Depot, $300 to our student services department for some cedar garden beds that they donated for our functional life skills program. And then the other one is a $500 donation from the Mothers Club for grade 4 t-shirts. So again, just very appreciative of the donations. It doesn't require board action, but just speaks to the continuous generosity of folks in the community. So just since our last meeting, I had the opportunity to attend as a chaperone the Washington, D.C. trip. What a remarkable educational experience for our 8th graders. A great combination of fun, history, civics, learning about our American government. We had the opportunity to go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier when the Mexican Secretary of State was there. So it's pretty interesting and a rare opportunity to see a foreign dignitary at the tomb. It doesn't happen often. We also saw the motorcade of the First Lady. Again, it was very impressive just to see the process that the Secret Service uses to shut down portions of cities when a member of the president's family is moving through D.C. I just have to tell you, everywhere we went, comments by folks, whether it was at the hotel or at a museum, about the behavior and the respect that our students showed. It was just such a proud moment. Those students serve us well, and so I'm honored to be able to chaperone that trip and make connections with students. Last night we had the Pinkerton Later Start Committee meeting. Again, the Academy is studying a possible later start. Right now they start at 7:15, which is very early. As we're aware, it's probably the earliest start time in the state of New Hampshire for a high school. So looking at different options, I think the process is moving slowly because they're collecting input. Right now they're really looking at sort of 3 options. One is not to change the schedule. The other one would be a 9 o'clock start, 9 a.m. start, and then also discuss a 7:35 start. All of those would have some implications for us as a district. Right now, Pinkerton is adding Fremont as a sending town. So the intention is, where there's no decisions that are being made this year, we're going to have Fremont have a seat at the table, and we'll continue those conversations for next year. Any possible change, the earliest, would be 25, 26. And so our team, have begun the process of looking at what the impact would be on us as a district if we were to move to either a PA with a 9 o'clock start time or 7:35. Also had an opportunity to attend the STEAM night. What a really incredible event. It's something that after last year, I'm like, how are they going to top this? How are they going to make it better? And they did. It was nice to be outdoors and to see how they wove in the celebration of the 275th anniversary into STEAM, into the giving games, the quality of the work that they did. I never thought you'd be able to blend STEAM and the history of the town. I was proven wrong, which I appreciate. So again, thank you to Mrs. Wise Carver and Mrs. Mayu and the number of teacher volunteers that they had to assist with that. And I think that's really it, unless the board has any questions about any of the items or anything else that wasn't discussed.
I had an 8th grader on your trip. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You may or may not have a video of you dancing.
There is certainly, I did have the opportunity to to dance in front of the White House. And it was a great, unique opportunity for some of our students to participate in that as well. And if I had to like pick a top 3, dancing in front of the White House was probably one of the highlights. So,
Is that a part of the superintendent evaluation?
I think that
It
is
should be.
worthy of note in the evaluation, Dr. Hubner, yes. Oh, yeah. So
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I
good
saw.
things to say about you.
I saw the dancing too, but honestly, being serious here, you mentioned making connections. So you going in the first place as the superintendent is incredible. Like when else would you see a superintendent attend an 8th grade class trip? But then to have you dancing with the 8th grade students at the White House
You earned their
with them,
respect, just FYI.
it's all about making those connections, and you truly immerse yourself in that. So I just commend you for that, because that's unforgettable for those 8th grade students to see the leadership doing that.
Thank you.
All right. We are going into non-public at this point. So at this point, we will go into our non-public under RSA 91A3, 2A and C, the dismissal, promotion, or compensation of any public employee or the disciplining of such employee, and C, matters which, if discussed in public, would likely affect adversely the reputation of any person other than a member of the public body itself. And for the public, before we go into non-public, I'll just announce that no decisions will be made public from that non-public meeting after we come out. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Did you make the motion, and then did we get a second on that?
Make a second.
Thank you. And I'll do roll call. Yes?
Yes, please.
Ms. Denton?
Yes.
Dr. Hubner? Yes. Mr. Cabarrus?
Yes.
Dr. Poor?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. It's 9:14.